I came back from town, whistling to myself, expecting the usual peace of my farm, the gentle rustling of the wind through the fields, the distant mooing of my bulls, and the familiar scent of fresh earth. But the moment I pulled into my driveway, my blood pressure spiked like a rocket. My front pasture, my personal land, had been transformed into what could only be described as an upscale suburban circus. Tents, lawn chairs, picnic blankets. There were at least 40 people lounging around, sipping mimosas, nibbling on charcuterie boards, and laughing as if they had paid admission to my property. Kids were running through my vegetable garden, trampling the rows I had painstakingly cultivated for months. And there, standing in the center of it all, directing traffic like she owned the place, was Diane Whitmore. I threw my truck into park so hard the tires skidded on the dirt. My farm dog, Duke, leapt from the passenger seat, barking as he sensed my fury. I slammed the door shut, my boots hitting the ground with purpose. People barely noticed me at first, too busy clinking their glasses and flipping their gourmet burgers on portable grills. But when I strode up to Diane, my fists clenched at my sides, she turned to face me with a smug little smile, the kind that made my fingers itch to grab the nearest water hose and spray her straight into next week. "Oh, Jake," she said, feigning surprise as if she hadn't orchestrated this entire disaster. "You're back early. We were just enjoying this beautiful weather on your lovely land." I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the sheer audacity it must take to set up an entire HOA picnic on someone else's private farm without so much as a courtesy call. "What in the hell?" I said slowly, forcing down the rising growl in my throat. "Do you think you're doing on my property?" Diane chuckled, waving a manicured hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. We're just having a little neighborhood get-together. The community needed a fresh, scenic place to bond, and frankly, your farm is much more picturesque than the community park." I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "You mean the community park that you personally had a hand in shutting down because you wanted to build a decorative pond instead?" She blinked at me, unbothered. Details. The point is, we needed a spot, and your farm is just sitting here with all this unused space." "Unused space?" I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. "Diane, do you understand the concept of private property? You can't just waltz in here with your wine club and throw a damn festival in my yard." She sighed, exasperated, as if I were a stubborn child throwing a tantrum over something trivial. "Oh, Jake, stop being so territorial. You've got all these acres and nothing to do with them. Honestly, it's selfish of you not to share. Think of this as an opportunity for some goodwill with the community." I glanced around at the scene. There was an elderly woman setting up a badminton net between two of my fence posts. A group of dads was tossing a football dangerously close to my chicken coop. 2 kids were chasing my barn cat, and some man in cargo shorts was examining my tractor like he was about to put it up for auction. I took a deep breath, my pulse pounding. "I'm going to give you exactly 5 minutes to clear out." Diane rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be ridiculous. We'll be done in a few hours. Just go inside, take a nap or something. You'll barely notice we're here." I smiled then. A slow, knowing smile that made Diane's confidence falter for the first time since I had arrived. "All right," I said, nodding. "If you won't leave willingly, I'll handle it my way." Without another word, I turned on my heel and strode toward the barn. My bulls had been locked up all day, restless, eager for some open space to stretch their legs. I had been planning on letting them out into the south pasture later in the evening, but plans change. I reached the heavy wooden gate and unlatched it with a satisfying click. The bulls snorted, sensing their freedom, their massive hooves stamping against the dirt. These weren't your friendly, docile dairy cows. These were bulls, all muscle, horns, and attitude, and they weren't used to unexpected guests in their territory. Behind me, I heard Diane still prattling on about how I needed to embrace the spirit of hospitality. That was when I swung the gate wide open. A beat of silence. Then, with a rumbling sound like distant thunder, the bulls surged forward. Screams erupted across the picnic. Lawn chairs toppled. Wine glasses shattered. Someone knocked over an entire folding table as they scrambled to run. A man dove headfirst into a kiddie pool meant for the toddlers. Diane shrieked, her designer sun hat flying off as she tried to sprint in her high heels. She didn't get far. Her foot got caught in a discarded picnic blanket, sending her sprawling face-first into the dirt. My bulls, uninterested in actual violence, merely stomped through the chaos, tossing their heads, snorting, and generally ensuring that nobody had the opportunity to feel too comfortable trespassing on my land ever again. A man who had previously been grilling steak was now attempting to scale my fence with nothing but a pair of tongs in his hand. Another woman had thrown herself into a bush, where she remained, trembling, watching the bulls as though they were fire-breathing dragons. And standing in the middle of it all, now covered in mud, her sundress torn at the hem, was Diane. Her face was red with fury, her eyes locked onto me like she was preparing to personally draft 100 lawsuits. "This isn't over, Jake," she screeched, shaking a fist as if she were some kind of cartoon villain. "You think you can intimidate me? You have no idea who you're messing with." I leaned against the fence, calm as ever, tipping my hat back as I surveyed the destruction. "Well, Diane," I drawled, "I reckon now you'll think twice before planning any more surprise picnics on my farm." And with that, I whistled for Duke, turned on my heel, and walked back toward the house, leaving Diane and her HOA circus to figure out how to escape their very unexpected bull run. Diane was still fuming by the time the last of her picnic crew limped off my farm. Some of them had lost shoes in the mud, others had wine-stained shirts from panicked collisions, and one particularly unlucky man had a streak of barbecue sauce down his leg, courtesy of an upturned grill. The bulls, now satisfied with their brief reign of terror, had retreated to their usual grazing spots, their tails flicking lazily as if they hadn't just caused a suburban exodus. I leaned against my truck, arms crossed, watching Diane struggle to compose herself. Her once pristine sundress was streaked with dirt, and a single piece of lettuce clung to her hair like a badge of humiliation. Her nostrils flared as she whipped out her phone, stabbing at the screen with a vengeance. "You'll regret this, Jake," she seethed, not even looking up. "I swear on everything you will pay for this." I shrugged. "Only thing I regret is not grabbing a beer to enjoy the show." She shot me a glare so sharp I thought it might pierce through my skull. Then, with a dramatic huff, she turned on her heel and stomped toward her car, muttering under her breath the whole way. The rest of the HOA members scurried after her, eager to escape the nightmare I had just unleashed upon them. I figured that was the end of it. I figured wrong. 2 days later, I woke up to the sound of Duke barking his head off. I threw on my boots and stepped out onto the porch, only to find a police cruiser parked in my driveway. A stout officer stood beside it, arms folded, expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Morning, Jake," he said, nodding at me. "Morning, Sheriff," I replied, stepping down the porch steps. "Something I can help you with?" He exhaled sharply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Got a complaint filed against you. Reckless endangerment, property damage, public disturbance." I blinked at him. "Public disturbance? I live on a dam farm." He gave me a pointed look. "You released a herd of bulls on a group of people." I smirked. "A group of people who were trespassing on my land." He sighed. "Look, Jake, I know how Diane is. And trust me, between you and me, I wouldn't trust her to lead a bake sale, let alone an HOA. But she's pressing hard on this. Got her lawyer friend filing paperwork, making it sound like you nearly started a stampede straight through town." I crossed my arms, the amusement draining from my face. "So what, she wants me arrested?" "Not quite. But she sure as hell wants to drag you into court over it." I let out a slow breath, staring past the sheriff toward the open fields beyond. I should have known Diane wouldn't take the loss quietly. The woman was like a bad rash. Just when you thought you'd gotten rid of her, she flared up worse than before. "All right," I said, cracking my knuckles. "She wants a fight?" She's got one. 2 days later, I found myself in the middle of a town meeting. It was held in the old community center, a place that hadn't seen this much action since the Great Bake-Off scandal of '09, when Mrs. Abernathy accused Mr. Turner of using store-bought pie crust. The room was packed with locals, half of them farmers who had known me since I was knee-high, and the other half were HOA members who looked at me like I was some kind of unhinged outlaw. Diane sat near the front, a smug smile plastered across her face. She had cleaned up since her mud-soaked humiliation, but there was still an air of tension in her posture, like she was holding onto her grudge with both hands. Next to her sat Todd, a slick-haired attorney who looked like he charged by the breath. The mayor, an older man who had been in office so long that nobody remembered voting for him, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "All right, folks, let's get to it. Seems we've got ourselves a bit of a situation between Jake and the HOA." Diane shot to her feet. "A situation? This is a disgrace. A crime." She turned to the crowd, eyes wide with righteous indignation. This man released wild, dangerous animals on innocent citizens. My friends could have been seriously injured, or worse. I snorted, loud enough for the room to hear. "Wild animals? Lady, they're bulls, not rabid wolves." Diane ignored me, whipping out a stack of papers. "I have here witness statements, video footage, and a formal legal complaint. This behavior was reckless, unprovoked, and unprovoked." I cut in, stepping forward. "You invaded my land. Without permission. Brought 40 people with you. Trashed my property. And then had the nerve to act like I was the problem." The farmers in the room muttered in agreement, a few nodding along. The HOA folks, however, whispered amongst themselves like I was some kind of danger to society. Todd, the lawyer, stood up then, buttoning his suit jacket like he was about to deliver the case of the century. "Mr. Simmons," he said smoothly, "do you deny that you intentionally released aggressive livestock in response to this gathering?" I tilted my head. "Do you deny that your client was trespassing?" Todd gave a tight-lipped smile. "My client was under the impression that this land was community space." I barked out a laugh. "Community space? You mean my land, the land I pay taxes on, the land I own." Diane huffed. "It was an honest mistake." I leveled a glare at her. "Funny how your honest mistake involved setting up grills, tents, and decorations like you planned the whole thing days in advance." The room fell silent. Even some of the HOA members looked at her sideways now. The mayor sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, here's what I see. Diane, you and your HOA folks were in the wrong for using Jake's land without permission. Jake, you probably shouldn't have let loose a bunch of bulls in response, but honestly, I can't say I wouldn't have done the same." A few chuckles rippled through the room. The mayor turned to Diane. "Drop the charges, Diane. You know damn well you don't have a case, and if you try to push it, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you are." Diane stiffened, her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment I thought she might actually explode. But instead, she let out a sharp breath and gave a tight nod. "Fine. But this isn't over." I smirked. "It never is with you, is it?" With a dramatic flourish, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her HOA loyalists trailing behind. I turned to the mayor. "Guess that's settled then?" He chuckled. "For now. But I'd keep an eye on her. That woman holds grudges like a damn snapping turtle." I shook his hand and left the meeting with a satisfied grin. Diane thought she had won the battle. She had no idea the war had just begun. Diane didn't take the loss quietly. That much was obvious when I woke up the next morning to find a stack of official-looking papers stuffed into my mailbox. I pulled them out, flipping through the pages with a scowl. Property dispute. She was actually trying to claim that a portion of my land wasn't legally mine, that some old zoning technicality made it community property. I let out a slow breath, resisting the urge to crumple the papers into a ball and feed them to my bulls. Instead, I grabbed my truck keys and drove straight to the county records office. If Diane wanted to play legal games, I'd play back. The clerk behind the desk was an old friend, Mrs. Barlow, who had been working there since before I was born. She peered over her glasses when I handed her the papers, her lips pressing into a thin line as she skimmed them. "Oh, she's desperate," she muttered, flipping through the records on her desk. "I remember this land being properly deeded to your family, clear as day." "Think she's got anything to stand on?" I asked, leaning against the counter. Mrs. Barlow scoffed. "Not unless she's found a time machine and gone back 70 years to change the documents." She pulled out an old, worn file and set it in front of me. "Your grandfather won this land fair and square in a legal property transfer. The only thing Diane has is wishful thinking." I grinned. Perfect. That should have been the end of it. But Diane wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had money, influence, and just enough legal know-how to be a pain in my backside. A week later, I got served with an official lawsuit. She wasn't just claiming part of my land. She was trying to sue for damages, claiming my bulls had caused emotional distress and endangered public safety. The amount she was asking for was absurd, but that wasn't the point. She didn't care about the money. She just wanted to make my life miserable. I wasn't about to let her win. I hired my own lawyer, an old cowboy named Ed who had been handling cases like this longer than Diane had been alive. He was the type of guy who showed up to court in a BOLO tie and cowboy boots, unimpressed by fancy legal jargon. When we sat down to go over the case, he just chuckled. "She's grasping at straws," he said, flipping through the lawsuit papers. "She's hoping you'll settle just to make her go away." "She doesn't know me very well, does she?" I said, cracking my knuckles. Ed smirked. "No, but she's about to learn." The court date was set, and the whole town was buzzing about it. Folks took sides, half of them rooting for me, the other half whispering about how Diane was just trying to civilize the area. It was ridiculous. The woman moved to a farm town and then got mad that she lived next to a farm. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Diane showed up looking smug, wearing a sharp business suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Her lawyer, Todd, was by her side, shuffling papers like he had something important to say. Ed leaned over to me and whispered, "You ready for some fun?" I grinned. "Always." The judge, an older man who had probably heard every ridiculous case under the sun, sighed as he looked at the paperwork in front of him. "All right, let's get to it. Ms. Whitmore, you're claiming damages against Mr. Simmons due to an incident on his property." Diane stood up, smoothing down her blazer. "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Simmons released aggressive livestock on a group of unsuspecting residents, creating a dangerous situation that could have resulted in serious harm." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Simmons, is this true?" I stood, tipping my hat slightly. "Your Honor, my land was trespassed on by Ms. Whitmore and her guests, without my permission. I took reasonable action to reclaim my property." Todd scoffed. "Reasonable? You set bulls loose on a group of civilians." Ed leaned forward. "Your Honor, may I submit evidence?" The judge nodded, and Ed pulled out a large envelope, sliding it across the desk. The judge opened it and pulled out a series of photographs, clear as day, showing Diane and her group setting up their picnic, hauling in grills, setting up tables. One particularly damning picture showed Diane smiling proudly as she held up a bottle of wine, posing next to a handmade banner that read, "HOA Spring Gathering." The judge frowned. "Ms. Whitmore, this doesn't look like an accident. It looks like a planned event." Diane shifted uncomfortably. "It was a misunderstanding." Ed smirked. "Your Honor, we also have signed statements from multiple witnesses, neighbors who were invited to this event, confirming that Ms. Whitmore knowingly set up this gathering on Mr. Simmons' land without permission." The judge looked unimpressed. "Ms. Whitmore, you trespassed on private property. You do not have a legal right to be there. And as for the aggressive livestock," he sighed, rubbing his temples, "it's a farm. Livestock exists on farms." Todd scrambled to salvage the case. Your Honor, my client was unaware that the land was private property. The judge cut him off. Are you seriously telling me that your client didn't know that the fenced-in farm with barns, crops, and animals wasn't private property? Todd hesitated, then sat back down. The judge shook his head. Case dismissed. And Ms. Whitmore, I'd suggest you learn the difference between community spaces and personal property before wasting the court's time again. The gavel came down. Just like that, it was over. Diane turned bright red, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue, but no words came out. Finally, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. I stepped outside, inhaling the fresh air. The town folks who had gathered outside clapped me on the back, laughing and shaking my hand. She really thought she was gonna win that one, Ed chuckled, adjusting his hat. She'll be back, I said, stretching. People like her always are. And I was right. Diane didn't give up. But she never tried to take my land again. Instead, she settled for passive-aggressive notes, unnecessary HOA regulations, and the occasional complaint to the town board about the smell of my farm animals. In response, I made sure to place my new chicken coop as close to the HOA property line as possible. I figured if Diane wanted to live near a farm, she ought to get the full experience.